Welcome to My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson, a journey into the deepest teachings of Torah and their application to our personal, emotional, and psychological lives.
A good Tavach, a good week. We continue our journey in the life-changing Sefer HaTanya. This program, first and foremost, is dedicated to our holy brothers at the front lines in Eretz HaKodesh, in Eretz Yisrael, protecting the men, women, and children of the Holy Land. Hashem should protect them all, protect Eden in all of Eretz Yisrael and all over the world. It's also dedicated in honor and memory of Rabbi Yosef Halevi Weinberg Olav Hashalom, Rabbi Moshe Pinchas HaKohen Katz Olav Hashalom, Rabbi Yael HaKohen Khan Olav Hashalom. It's also in schus and merit of Rav Zevi Cheskel HaKohen and Risha Katz, Le'erich Yomim V'Shanim Tevis, for many long, healthy years. Okay. Should also mention that today was Chav Cheshvan, which was the 20th of Cheshvan, the birthday of the 5th Chabad Rebbe, the Rebbe Rashab, who is known as the Rambam of Chassidus. And learning Tanya, especially when you look into the Maimorim, the discourses of the Rebbe Rashab, obviously enriches and explains many details, as I shall point out throughout our shiurim, including today's. So with that, let us go right into where we are. We began chapter 16, Tazayin, where the Alter Rebbe establishes, after explaining the Beinoni in chapters 12, 13, 14, 15, he continues now two klolim, calls it a klal gadol. He begins the chapter with klal gadol, and we reviewed that in more detail in the previous classes. The klal gadol b'avedus Hashem l'beini, that the ikar is not just behavioral, but limshel ulishlet ala teva shabachol hasmali. A personality shift. You actually have self-mastery and control over your emotional impulses. Behavioral, even a child can be taught, at least for a while, to be disciplined behaviorally. But what we're looking here for Avodas Hashem. Remember, we learned about Ovid, and Ovid Elikim, that he's serving, and not just going into routine or mechanical autopilot. Aveda. And Aveda ultimately translates into thought, speech, and action. That's the ultimate litmus test. But Aveda is a service that the person has become a servant of God. Someone serving God. So that's the first klal, gadol. Now comes another klal, which says, "V'yeser al kein sarich leida klal gadol ba'aveda lebeinanim." So you see again, he says klal gadol. And here, let's elaborate a bit, and then we'll continue learning inside. Here the Alter Rebbe demonstrates, it's maybe not the right, respectful way to put it, but it's profound psychological insight into the human psyche. Because till now we've been talking about, at length, relatively, about the mind, about the emotions, starting in chapter 9, where he spoke about the reflective mind, and there's the impulsive emotions, and then chapter 12, Moyach Shal Talev, that naturally we have the ability to control ourselves as we see. You can expect that for a normal human being to control themselves. That's what maturity is about. You can't expect that from a newborn. So we grow into a certain maturity. The mind grows, and it has the ability to naturally control the impulses of the heart. And that's what we're calling upon. If you don't have that, what kind of expectations? It's like asking a newborn baby or someone who's just wired a certain way. That's their nature. There's nothing they can do about it. But we have the ability to control our nature. Nature meaning the natural emotions. But the question is, to what extent? Is it just black and white? Either you have total control or you have no control. Obviously, that's not the case, because you see sometimes we have more control, sometimes less. As we just said, Aved is a constant battle. It's a constant process. Just because yesterday you controlled yourself doesn't mean today you control yourself. So that's number one, that we're going through different shifts. But even in that itself, if we're saying that we're expecting a person not just to control themselves behaviorally, but also lishlet, to control their very emotions, again, this does not mean to eliminate the animal soul. That one cannot do on their own. It's part of who we are. But it means controlling those impulses that the animal soul should not be able to control your life. So it's not just, as I said, pure behavioral. There's an element of an emotional and psychological attitude that you've matured to the point that certain things you just have, you keep it at bay, or you keep it under control. But that itself has many, as I said, variations. But even more importantly, and that's what the Alter Rebbe is going to address now, and the issue of, and what happens when you contemplate, and you use your moyach shal talev, and you're using your mind, but you don't always get the emotions all excited. I mean, take any example. A person, let's say, take a very mundane example, goes to work. Do they like their job? Some people love their job. Some people learn to like it. Some people hate it. But they do it because they need parnas. So how much of the heart is really there? Sometimes as much as necessary. It could also be completely to be just the goal is that it shouldn't just do it mechanically, to have some emotions involved. And that's why an employer, the boss, is going to try to motivate, incentivize, because he wants a worker that works with passion and with heart is going to be more successful, especially if you're working with other people. But what level? You'll see in any company, you'll see people say, this person, mamish a pleasure. They're always optimistic, always passionate. And that spills over to their relationship with our clients, with our customers, with our vendors. And this person is very competent, but not necessarily so invested in it, for whatever reason. So the same thing, let's carry it out over to Avodas Hashem. You're using your mind to contemplate. That's what the Beinoni does, to contemplate on the greatness of Hashem. Remember, we're talking not the Ava Mesuteres, the natural, innate love that we have, which is he said, that's enough for someone who has the habit or the routine, either first nature, by first nature or second nature, as we learned in the previous chapter, to be committed to Torah mitzvahs. So we're not talking about that. We're talking about something that's generated through our effort. But how much? How much does the mind actually stimulate those emotions? So you could be, in the fullest sense, that is burning with a fiery passion in your emotions. Or it could be not so fiery. So the Alter Rebbe now lays out these distinctions. And this is critical, because when you really come down to it, people say, 1 second, I've done what the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya. I contemplated by Shema, and during davening about Kulei Kamei Kolo Chashiv, Mamal Klam, Sevu Klam, and Kulei Kamei Kolo Chashiv, like he explains in chapter 3. And it didn't awaken. There he talks about the Chachma, Bina, Das. When you have those three, it'll give birth. Das is kashrus. Chachma and Bina is the conceiving of an idea. Bina is developing it. And someone says, it didn't really awaken emotions in that passionate way. So is that I'm all lost? Does that mean I can't be a Beinoni? Especially according to the first klal, that it requires not just behavioral, but it needs emotional involvement, meaning the emotions also are engaged and you're controlling the emotions of the animal soul. So Alter Rebbe says, no, there's many levels. Yes, the ultimate would be getting that fiery passion in the fullest sense of the word. What he's going to use, the language we'll learn, is that comes to a point, that would be a full passionate fiery love. And more l'shenus, as we'll learn. And then there is that you have contemplated, but the Ava is still musuteres b'meche, meaning it's intellectual inclination. Your mind tells you it's a good thing, but it has still an intellectual, emotional. Musuteres b'meche. And v'talumis libe. It's a love. Talumis libe means in the innards or within the heart. But talumis, concealed, hidden places in the heart. Some expression from Tehillim. But this doesn't mean hidden, completely hidden. It means it's not the fiery passion. So here you see a situation which we see all the time, and actually this is an excellent barometer of understanding how a person is committed. You can actually turn this into like literally like a quiz or a way of evaluation sheet of workers or anything to know their depth of their commitment. So he says this too still can be considered avodah tama, complete avodah. It's not routine because you have contemplated, you just as not inspired to the point of complete fiery passion. But it's still enough because your mind understands it's worthy. So it's not just like the worker who's doing the job as if he's forced, because he has no choice, he has to make a living, he has to pay his bills. So he's ethically doing, we're not talking about someone that's not ethically doing the work. But it's not there, his heart is not there. Here the heart is there. But it's not there in a fiery passion because, we'll soon understand why, but he's not there, but his mind understands the importance of it. He understands that his job is important. I'm just using the mashal again. And it even affects his heart, but not with that full fiery passion on the highest level. And that too is going to be considered the complete avodah for a Beinoni, because bottom line is, it will result in the control of the behavioral control of thought, speech, and action, and it also satisfies the first klal, because there is some work here. I don't say some, it could be a very extensive work. The mind and the emotions are working, they just have not fully consumed this individual. That's what we're going to learn now. And we began learning. So let's learn now inside. The Yesed al Kain. And furthermore, or an additional all-encompassing principle, or klal gadol, fundamental principle of worship, of the worship of Beini that we need to know. Tzarech leida. That means it's important for us to understand this, because this is critical in being able to fulfill the goal of being al tihi rasha, meaning like a Beinoni, which is the central theme of Sefer Shel Beinim. And it also is empowering, because it's telling you, even if you don't reach that level, you have the ability to fulfill the avodah that's needed to be a Beinoni. That what? She says, Shagam im ein yad sichle v'ruach binosei maseges lohelid avos Hashem bizgalus libei. This is the principle, the fundamental principle. Even if his intellectual capacity, what we spoke about in the first klal and earlier chapters, that he's concentrating, his mind is at work, he's focusing and contemplating, but his intellectual capacity and cognitive focus, again, ein yad sichle v'ruach binosei. So sichle usually and ruach benas is usually chachma and bina. Remember, chachma and bina is what gives birth to emotions. With das, the iskashus, the intimacy, the intimate bonding and connection. So the yatz is sichle v'ruach benasei. So the intellectual capacity and cognitive focus, or you can say development focus, the development of the idea, because he says clearly ruach benasei. So it's not in a state. They're not sufficient. It's ein yad sichle maseges lehelid avos Hashem bizgalus libei. It's not sufficient to generate a love of God bizgalus libei, tangibly in his heart. This is from Mishlei Yud Ches Beis, Proverbs 18:2. So it's not sufficient. He's doing the work, but it doesn't get to that point. What means bizgalus libei? So he says, Sheyi libei be'er kerish be'esh, that his heart should burn like a flaming fire. We learned earlier that language, kerish be'esh, from Shir HaShirim Ches Vav 8:6, Song of Songs. V'chefetz b'chafetza v'chasheka v'tshuka murgeshes b'leiv l'dovka bay, and with a intense desire, or to desire intensely, with a desire, craving, and longing in his heart to attach himself to God, l'dovka bay. So the Alter Rebbe spells out what means bizgalus libei. This is what would be the ultimate, that the mind has affected him, the seichel and the ruach, the yad sichle, ruach binasei, to the point that it's burning within him, and there's a strong desire. So this is a person who's completely committed, completely consumed, we can call it. As we learned earlier, the process. But here it's not that way. What is it? What has he achieved? Rather, ha'ava mesuteres b'meichi v'talumas libe. The love remains concealed in his mind, and v'talumas libe, and the hidden places in the heart, which comes from Tehillim, Mem Beis Chav Beis 44:22. So let's explain these two pieces here. First, Avos Mesuteres b'meichi. This is not to be confused with Avos Mesuteres, the natural one that we're innately born with. Here we're talking about Avos Mesuteres that comes through, generated through our effort, initiated through our effort. But the Ava has not become full-blown in the mind. Now this too we see. A person can study something or can research something, can learn about something, can concentrate, and it does create a certain appreciation of the thing he's concentrating on. You start seeing something, wow, I didn't know this thing has value, now I know it has value. I'm going to use again a mundane example. You're looking to buy a house. Okay, you go research this, they finally find something. Yeah, the things you don't like, you reject. But there's a house that seems to be really fitting. You call your spouse, check it out. And your mind tells you, everything I need is here. But you're not in love with it. I'm not talking about emotional. Even in the mind appreciates it and sees its quality and value. But it's still not, even in the mind, a full, what we would call a full intellectual, being drawn intellectually to it. You say it's an option. Remember, there's falling in love with your mind, there's falling in love with your heart. I'll get to that in a moment. Right now we're talking b'meichi. So the mind has come to the conclusion that this thing is definitely in the category. It's been nominated, so to speak. But it's not further than that. Then comes the next step, that actually your heart starts falling in love with it. And here too, it can be you can't live without it, complete passion, or it could be what he calls talumas libe. It's there, but it's still not with a whole passion and so on. So what you have from this is that the moyach has done its job. It's been drawn to godliness. Let's go back to the nimshal. It's even affected the heart, but it's not all alive and passionate. So there's ava bizgalas halev, like we said, that's burning and passionate like that. And then there's a love that is betalumis halev. It's not burning like that. It's just the heart is being drawn to it, but you can't call it being all-consuming. Okay. In a mimer from the Alter Rebbe, and he explains what does it mean. He gives the example of someone who's naturally lazy, but he needs to make money. The example I gave before from going to business. So he goes to the marketplace, does everything he has to do. But he doesn't do it with passion. He does it cold-bloodedly, a little more detached. But he's committed to it. And his heart is also involved, but it's mostly to get the money that he has to make. Not that he loves what he's doing, like we discussed earlier. Okay. This is my Mori Admur Azak and Ktsarim. The Alter Rebbe says this, I believe it's on page 578, yeah. Okay. And the Alter Rebbe is going to conclude, we'll continue learning, but the Alter Rebbe is going to conclude, say even if it's on this level, that's not full passion, it's still considered the Aveda Tama, complete Aveda for the Beinani. That's the Klal Gadol. Which, as I said, is very reassuring. And also covers that there's a full spectrum of options of how much the divine soul is affecting the animal soul, and how much control you have, and how much it affects your mind and your heart. So there's a whole spectrum. Okay. Now the Alter Rebbe continues. But before we continue, let's learn the Hagah. There's Hagah here. In the Hagah, the Alter Rebbe, Hagah is a gloss that the Alter Rebbe wrote, considered like a footnote. It's usually more in depth, explaining something that he said in inside, but it's not directly in the flow of the theme, meaning you can learn it without the Hagah, but the Hagah adds a whole other dimension. In this Hagah, the Alter Rebbe actually qualifies something. Is this fact that this person doesn't have the full fiery passion, is that up to him? Or is that some people are just not wired that way? There's still the expectation of Aveda to work as much as you can. So the Alter Rebbe says in the Hagah, Vasibelazeh, what is the reason why a person would not have that level of developed emotion passionately? And it's not that he answers that's wired that way, but he's going to answer that it's stages. In the stages of maturity of a human being, the fact of the matter is, I mentioned before, a newborn child can be expected Moich Shal Ta'alev. But what about age 2? Age 2, you could begin to expect that a child will say thank you. At age 5, the expectations are higher. What's happening? It's not just we randomly choose these ages, because the development of the child, their cognitive and emotional development, is giving them more control over themselves. That's why a boy at bar mitzvah and a girl at bas mitzvah are considered to become bnei das, bari das. What does that mean? They have more control over themselves, and therefore can be responsible for their mitzvahs, for their behavior. What has happened? The mind has grown, and in turn the mind has also grown in its connection and controlling the impulses. As I said, a newborn, that's not possible. So here in the Hagah, the Alter Rebbe gives us more insight in the actual anatomy and dynamics of what's actually working, how it works. So he says, Vasibelazeh, that this isn't just a matter of somebody not meditating properly. So therefore it doesn't cause all that passionate, fiery love. It's also could be parts of the stages of a person's development. So he says, Vasibelazeh, and the reason for this, for what? He says it on the words, V'talumis libe, that the Av is only mesuteres b'meichi v'talumis libe. He says, Vasibelazeh, the cause for this, or the reason, that it doesn't create and arouse such powerful emotions, even though the mind is concentrating and so on, he mipnei heyes hameichen shalei v'nefesh ruach, well, hameichen shalei v'nefesh ruach v'shama shalei mibchines ibur. V'helem techa tfuna ki yedu liyedei chen chachman estar. So let me translate and then I'll explain. Is because the person's mind, basically his power was his maturity of his mind. And furthermore, v'nefesh ruach u'neshama shalei. Meaning the energies we know in the nefesh, in the neshama, there's 5 levels. The nefesh in the conscious faculties. The basic functional level is nefesh, the biological level. The ruach is the emotional, and the neshama is the intellectual powers. So all of them are mebchinas ibur. They're still in a state of gestation. They haven't fully developed yet. So I mentioned a child. A child is in that state. We know that. At a certain stage, that's what happens. Even though the mayach is there already, you can talk to a 5-year-old. And also on all levels. And the nefesh, the mayach shlei, and the nefesh ruach and the neshama shlei are all developed to some extent, but it's still gestation period, like pregnancy. And there's a concept like that. In Kabbalah, Chassidus talks about Ibur Yanike Meichen. When the language of Chira would be Mutfe Murgish Muskel. That there's the earliest stages are purely behavioral and reflexive. Behavioral, I mean, it's just a reflexive part of the impulses of a person. Ibur. Yanike is where he's growing to a state where he's already, the emotions are beginning to be tangible, you can relate to them, you can communicate with them. And Meichen is the highest level of maturity. Even though Ibur, what I just said, seems to be mamish like a child in pregnancy or a newborn child, but here Ibur is a further level. I'm just mentioning because it's in the context of those stages. In Ayin Beis in volume 3, he talks a lot about and brings this Tanya Applied to Zion. So Ibur here is a little higher than when usually the way Ibur is used, because there is something developing, but it's still in a gestation stage. And vehelam teichat funa. What does that mean? So let's talk about pregnancy. So the first trimester we're not discussing. In later stages of pregnancy, the child is fully developed, but it's still within its mother's womb. And even within the child itself, not everything is fully, the child is in a fetal position, as the Gemara says. The moichin are not yet in a place of development, the emotions, but you have the full child is there, the physical child. So the same idea is beruchni psychologically. You could have a state where there's already moichin and there's nefesh, ruach, and neshama, but they're still in a gestation, psychological gestation. That would be after birth already. He's not getting into here what age, because he's not talking ages. I'm just using that as an example. Here this can be a full-blown adult. But their maturity level, either that's where they are or that's where they've reached in their Aveda, in their maturity, it's still relatively gestation. So it's there, but it's concealed. The Helam Teichat Funa, just like a child in Ibur, is in a state that's concealed within its mother's womb, Uber Yerachime. So here, Helam Teichat Funa. The Tfuna is the Bina. Well, here it talks about Tfuna, and we'll learn the second Haggah later in this chapter. It's a lower level of Bina, but it's within Bina. The child is not yet the Mides, which are born from Tfuna, from Bina, Chachma Bina, are still concealed within Tfuna. And not from the realm of emotional birth and revelation. Leidav Izgalus means once a child is born, you see the child as an independent entity. What is that, Lamaila? What is that psychologically? The midas, you see midas that are born. But here the midas are still so-called, you could say, submerged within the tfuna. Like it's known to the Kabbalists, and it's in Eitz Chaim and other places. So here the Alter Rebbe has now explained the dynamics, the anatomy. What's going on with this person? That's why the emotions are not fiery passion, because they're still in that stage of Ibur. They're developing. Can they get there? Even in this individual, yes, they can. But at this state, we're talking about someone who's not reached that level yet, and yet still he's called a Beini in his Aveda, which we'll continue to learn in the next year. Everyone have a good week. May there only be peace and shalom, and may all the hostages be returned intact. And Eden should only be menucha, and let us march into the Gula Amitis V'Ashleim.
This has been My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Please join us again next week. Visit ChasidusApplied.com for archived classes and more resources.